Jos Verstappen had a plan. His young son had barely learned to walk, but was already interested in learning to drive a go-kart, and his father wanted to teach him. He was still a busy man himself, racing in Formula One, albeit generally at the back end of the field. Nevertheless, he decided he would wait until Max was 6 to buy him his first kart. Well, let's find out, does Max Verstappen have not a good relationship with his dad? Without further ado, let's begin. Then one day in Canada, his phone rang. It was Max, bawling with as much righteous anger as a toddler can summon. He begged for a go-kart, and when told he was not old enough, he told his father that he had seen his friend Stan Pex racing at the track in Genk, and Stan was 11 months younger than him. Not long after, his phone rang again. It was Max's mother, Sophie, with their son wailing in the background. "I think we have to buy Max a go-kart. Now." She had been the one bearing the brunt of Max's persistent complaining. The quad bike he would ride around the garden was no longer enough. It was the beginning of a journey that would carry Max Verstappen to the very top of motor racing, but reaching that final destination was not by accident or luck. In Jos, he had a father who had the contacts, resources, and industry knowledge to guide him up the ranks, but also a man who had untold drive to do so. Jos had made a mistake in his own career. He had been a prodigious talent in go-karting and junior formula in the late 1980s and early 1990s before jumping at the chance to race at the highest level. In his very first season of F1, he found himself teammate to Michael Schumacher, who won the title that year. Jos, meanwhile, did not compete the 1994 campaign and was dropped by Benetton. The 2 podiums he earned in that season were the only ones for the man known at home in the Netherlands as Jos the Boss. Later, he became known more internationally as Jos Verstappen. It was always his regret that he ended up in the championship-winning car at the age of 22 without the nous to handle it properly. In Max, he saw an opportunity to right those wrongs. Jos had been pushed hard by his own father, a publican and later ice cream parlor owner from southern Holland, and knew no other way. As their go-kart partnership started to take them further and further afield, he expected more from his son. Victory became as much a part of the routine as the drive home across Europe, and failure was rarely well received. Back in 2012, they had been racing in Sarno, a huge go-kart complex in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, on the edge of the urban sprawl of Naples. Verstappen had romped his way through the race weekend, but he lost the lead in the final decisive race to an opportunistic move around the hairpin. He had been the fastest driver all weekend and surely had the pace to retake the lead at some point, but impetuously dived down the inside at perhaps the only corner on the circuit where an overtake was nearly impossible. Verstappen collided with the leader and spun out. In what was his biggest race of the season, he was out. Jos was furious. After the race, he did not say a word to his son. Max had to get a friend to help him load the heavy go-kart into the Verstappen van. On the way home, 14-year-old Max tried to make amends with his father, who had performed something of a miracle to fix a burnt-out clutch and get the kart functioning again before the final. They argued, and when they stopped at a petrol station, Jos kicked his son out and drove off. Depending on who you believe, he either turned around and picked him up again a few minutes later, or Max rang his mother Sophie, who was a few miles behind. Either way, it was a harrowing experience. "I never had any surprises in F1 because no one was as hard on me as my dad," Max once said of the incident. They'd have to try hard to match him for certain. The young Verstappen had other mentors growing up. His family used to go on ski trips with the Schumachers, but Max spoke no German, so wasn't always aware of what his father was talking about with the legendary racing driver, but he did used to race him and his son, now at Haas, in 2-seater go-karts when they got the chance. In that sense, Verstappen has not often had an arm around his shoulder. When his parents split with some acrimony, time seems to have healed those wounds. He was still in primary school. He stayed with his father so they could focus on go-karting, and his sister Victoria went to live with his mother. Subscribe, like, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.